Hello, my name is Sarah Corcoran. I'm the Forest Watch Coordinator for the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter, and today we will be talking about creek critters, also known as macroinvertebrates, and what they are, where you can find them, and why they're important for our watersheds. You want to go ahead and advance, Rachel? So first off, what is a macroinvertebrate? It's a big term for a little critter. They are aquatic organisms that you can see with your eye, but they do not have a backbone. They've got a bunch of different names. Some of them are called creek critters or water bugs or aquatic insects, but they are not always insects, which we'll go into a little bit later. So macroinvertebrates can be found in freshwater systems like streams, rivers, and lakes. You can find them clinging under rocks or in the stream beds or in dense vegetation and leaf packs, either at the bottom of a pond or a lake or clinging to the reeds on the shores. So why are macroinvertebrates important? Why do we study them? They're helpful indicators of stream health because they spend most of their time in the water. They can't really move very far. They've got tiny little legs. They're easy to see and collect, and they have a varying level of sensitivity to pollution. So some macroinvertebrates can only be found in really clean water, and others are more commonly found in heavily polluted water. Clicky click. So as I was saying earlier, macroinvertebrates aren't always insects, although a majority of them are. And a majority of those insects are also in their larval or nymph form, so they're not quite adults yet. You'll find some crustaceans categorized as macroinvertebrates, some beetles, snails, clams, mussels, worms, but for the most part, the ones that you see most often are your larval or nymph forms. There are three main categories for macroinvertebrates when it comes to pollution sensitivity. You have your pollution-sensitive species that can't be found in polluted waters. You have some that are somewhat sensitive. They can handle a little bit of pollution, but you don't want to dump them into some place that is heavily polluted. They won't be able to survive. And there are your pollution-tolerant species that can live pretty much anywhere.
I'm going to talk to everyone today a little bit about how do we find and identify our macroinvertebrates. Given the situation that we're in today, we can't go out and look for macroinvertebrates with you all, but we wanted to talk a little bit about how we go about finding our macroinvertebrates and then how do we identify them. So how do we know what we have? We talked about how macroinvertebrates, our creek critters, live in our streams. So whenever you're out, and if you're nearby a stream, you could turn over a rock and you may find a number of them living underneath that rock. Then what you'll want to do is you'll want to brush off that rock very gently, probably with like a paintbrush or a spoon, into something that's white or clear so that you can see them. They are visible to the naked eye, but some of them are a little bit tinier and you may need a magnifying lens to fully view them. But we'll sort them into something like an ice cube tray or a plastic tray so that we can organize them by type. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use an identification chart that walks us through either this or that. So it either has a shell or it doesn't have a shell. It either has legs or it has no legs. And that chart, we're going to go to that next, is called a dichotomous key. It's a word that really means kind of two directions that you can go. So here we have a macroinvertebrate key or a dichotomous key. If you want to call it an identification chart, that's fine too. And if we start out at the top, I'm going to grab my pointer here. So whatever macroinvertebrate you have, you're going to take a look at it and you're going to say, does it have a shell or doesn't it have a shell? If it has a shell, the options are it could be a clam, it could be a snail. There's a number of different types here that it could be if it has a shell, and depends whether it has one shell or two. If it doesn't have a shell, then the next thing you would look at is, does it have legs or no legs? A lot of the ones you'll find actually have no legs, and that includes worms, leeches. We'll talk about those, and we'll show you a few of them. And then some of the ones that have little tail bristles, that includes things like Crayfish larvae and midges, which are very common, and we'll see those as well. If it happens to have legs, that branches into a number of different categories. Like Sarah mentioned, you could have a crustacean, which has multiple legs, more than 10. It could be a arachnid, so it could be a spider or a mite having 4 pair of legs, or it could be an insect having 3 pairs of legs. And from there, it breaks in deeper into whether it has wings or no wings, hard shell, soft shell, obvious tails, 1, 2, or 3 tails. And so we'll go into a little bit about what do those look like and how do we determine them. So Sarah had also mentioned there are 3 main types: pollution sensitive, somewhat sensitive, and pollution tolerant. We're going to start by talking about pollution sensitive macroinvertebrates. These can be found in really good water quality because they need a lot of dissolved oxygen in order to survive. So the more of these that you find, generally, the healthier your stream is. And some of these include stonefly, a mayfly, a water penny, something called a riffle beetle. But this is you can find both the adult and the larva. I have the adult featured here. Caddisfly, which is in its little house, and we'll talk about that too. Also a right-lobed snail. So I wanted to talk a little bit about each of these macroinvertebrates and give you some identifying pointers about them, some fun facts as well. And then after we go through a few of them, we're actually going to quiz you. We're going to ask you to take a look at a macroinvertebrate. We'll give you a list of a few that you can choose from, and you try to tell us what it is. So pay attention, okay? All right, so first up we have the stonefly. This is a really special critter because these guys are really, really sensitive. They are generally identified by two tails, and they have gills on the middle segment of their body, or we like to say in their armpits. I'm going to take my pointer here and kind of show you right here. They also have claws for capturing and holding things, capturing and holding onto the rocks. And a fun fact about them is they're what's called shredders. They wait for some of this material, some of these the prey to fall to the ground or fall to the bottom of the stream, and then they grab it and they shred it up. So imagine if you were tearing up pieces of paper. All right, so that's our stonefly. So our mayfly, the main way to tell the difference between the stonefly and the mayfly is that it has 3 tails. Usually, sometimes it has 2, but generally there's 3. They also have fluttering feather-like gills on the abdomen. So if you're looking at this picture, you're going to have the abdomen is here. Remember, on the stonefly, the gills were here. This is the thorax, and this is the head. So those are the 3 main parts, but on the mayfly, it's on the abdomen. And a fun fact about the mayfly is that they only live as an adult for a few days, but they live as an aquatic insect for a long, long time. And they're really, really common this time of year. Another one that is pollution sensitive is the caddisfly. And this one's kind of fun. They have 6 pairs of legs, like the rest of the insects we talked about, but they also have a pair of hooks on the last segment, and this is to help them attach underneath rocks. Fun fact about them is that they build protective cases out of found materials like wood or debris or stones. And you can see in this picture, there's kind of two different types of caddisfly houses. And we're actually going to build one later on in this webinar. They're also a scraper feeder, which means that they kind of scratch the surface to release material in order to eat. So those three were pollution sensitive. Now we're going to move into somewhat sensitive. Now this category is kind of a breadth of moderately sensitive to fairly sensitive before we get to our tolerant species. These guys can live in good to fair water quality, meaning they can tolerate some pollution, and moderate levels of dissolved oxygen, meaning that if the water has a little bit less oxygen, they could survive better than our friends that we just talked about. And these include crane flies, sow bugs, or isopods. They kind of look a little alien-like. Scuds, which are also called aquatic shrimp. They look a little shrimp-like. Damselflies, which are related to the dragonfly over here. And crayfish, which look like lobsters. And this big guy down here called a Hellgrammite, or otherwise known as a Dobsonfly. So a little bit about each of these guys. Your crayfish is in the crustacean family, so not an insect. He has 10 plus legs, and you can see here, you've got a bunch of them. And he's got 2 large pincer claws, so you want to remember that. That's kind of a giveaway. And a fun fact is they shed their hard outer shell or their exoskeleton whenever they're growing into their bigger size. These are actually pretty common in our freshwater sources, and you can see them out in the creek. Okay, and a Hellgrammite, this one's pretty cool. They look a little bit like a caterpillar with their segmented bodies, but they have a pretty large head and 2 pincers, or their jaws, for capturing prey. They're a pretty aggressive predator. So unlike some of our other friends, they go after other critters in the stream, and they can be yellowish or brownish. And a fun fact is they can be as large as your hand, and they can also be commonly used as fish bait. The next one we want to talk about in this pollution-sensitive category, or somewhat pollution-sensitive category, is the dragonfly nymph. This one has a flat abdomen. You can kind of see here it's a little bit more squished than our other friends. There's no tail visible here, so different than the Mayfly, which had 3, and the Stonefly, which had 2. There's no tail here. They're a little short and chunky. That's a fun way to remember them. And it does not need to surface to breathe air. They actually can kind of circulate the air over their gills all underwater, and they're like one of the only ones that can do that. Then the last category is our pollution-tolerant category. These are found in any water quality. So even the most polluted areas tend to have these critters. They can survive at very low levels of dissolved oxygen. And this includes leeches, left lobe snail. So the other one was the right lobe snail. This is the left lobe, just turned the other way. Aquatic worms, flatworms, and midges. And we'll talk a little bit about each of those. So aquatic worms, these are going to look a little bit like your earthworm, except they're going to be a lot thinner and smaller. They're a little bit hair-like in how thin they are, but they can be different colors. They can be red or brown or tan. Don't have any legs, and they move in an S shape. Fun fact about them is that they can capable of living in areas with really low oxygen, so they're going to be one of the ones that'll survive in the most polluted waters. Another one that we wanted to bring up is the leech. You wouldn't think that this would be in your stream, but actually leeches are really common in the streams that may have a little bit more pollution. These are worm-like. They also have no legs, similar to our worms. They have a flatter body though, with brown spots. I don't know if you can kind of see here some of the spots. So that's a little bit of an identifier. They might be a little wider at the top and narrower at the bottom. So that's another identifier. They are parasitic and they do feed on blood. And they have a sucker mouth part, which you can't quite see in both of these pictures, but underneath, imagine if there's a little suction cup. And a fun fact is that in the past, doctors, medical personnel had used them in medical procedures, thinking that they helped people by releasing their blood. We don't do that today anymore, though. And the last one we want to talk to you about today is midges. Now, these are critters that kind of become little flies. They have what's called prolegs, and I'll just point right here. They're kind of sort of they're almost legs. They're not actual functioning legs, but they are like almost legs, and they use those to attach themselves to a surface and hang on, especially in a moving stream. They have a very small but visible head. You can kind of see in these pictures, this is their head. It's very small, but it's still visible. They like to wiggle a lot, and they can be red or green. Those are very common colors, and they can live for 2 weeks or several years as a larva. So that's pretty impressive. All right, so the next thing we'd like to do here is we'd like to invite everyone to turn their microphones on because we're going to be doing a little quiz. It's a very short quiz, but if everyone is interested in trying to see what they remember, we're going to be asking you to think back to what we talked about just now. I know it was really quick, but I have a feeling if I show you the same pictures, you may remember them. So let's try it. Okay, so our first critter here, does everyone have their microphones on? I hear some folks. Say yes if you're here.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, all right, excellent. So our first critter here, what do you think it is? Is it a caddisfly, a crayfish, or a worm?
Caddisfly? Worm?
And what did you think, Tala?
The first one. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Caddisfly? That's right. Wow, you did such a good job. You know why it's a caddisfly?
Yes.
Because it has a little house that it constructed out of rock material that it found. If it were a crayfish, wouldn't it have pincers? It look a little bit like a lobster?
Yeah, and it has 10 little feet things. Legs.
It has 6 little legs because it's an insect, but yes, it does have legs. Worms would not have any legs. If it were a worm, it would have no legs at all. Excellent. Good job, guys. All right, ready for the next one?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. What is this bug? Is it a stonefly, a midge, or a dragonfly?
Midge. Midge.
You guys are so good. Wow, how did you do that?
Because that was the last one.
Because it looks like the last one? You have a good memory. Yeah, so the reason that this is a midge is it has the little proleg at the end. It has the tiny little head, and it wiggles a lot, and it's red or green. If it were a stonefly, it would have 6 legs and 2 tails, and if it were a dragonfly, it would have a flat body. So good job, guys. Wow, you're really smart. All right, what is this bug? What do you think?
Bird one.
That's this Mayfly.
The second.
The second one, the Hellgrammite?
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Wow, you are so good. I thought I was going to have to help you out a little bit and give you some hints, but you really got this really quickly. Oh my goodness, you're going to be better than me. So a Hellgrammite is a just what you see there. He's got a large body that could totally fit in your hand, I bet. He's got the large pinchers for the jaw, and he's pretty aggressive looking, huh? Yeah. If this were a mayfly, he would have 3 tails, and if it were a leech, it would have no legs whatsoever and a sucker for a mouth. So you guys did a really good job. I feel like I didn't even have to quiz you. You just knew. All right. So once we've identified all of our critters, basically what we're going to do is we're going to count them. So this sheet here is really tiny, so I'm sorry it's really hard to see. But basically what you would do here is you would say, okay, in group 1, we have our sensitive or intolerant species. They can't handle pollution. So we would count them and we'd say, how many stoneflies did we find? How many mayflies did we find? And so forth. In category 2, we have our moderately intolerant or our somewhat sensitive species. They can handle a little bit of pollution, but not too much. So we would count them, and that includes our dragonfly nymph and our crayfish. We would count them up. And then in our 3rd category, we have our fairly tolerant. Actually, they have 4 categories here, but let's say in our 3rd category, we have our fairly to very tolerant. They can handle pollution. That includes our leeches and our midges and our worms. And so we would count them. And then once we've totaled each category, so all 3 categories have now a total, we'd come up with our biotic index, or the pollution tolerance rating, meaning we'd know based on how many and what we find, how healthy our streams are. We can't do that today, unfortunately, but we do know that our streams need our help sometimes. And so that's why we do these measures. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about some adaptations, and I'm going to give it off to Sarah.
I was still on mute. So as we were looking at our different species earlier, you may have noticed that some of them looked a little bit different. Some of them had 6 legs, some of them had big pinchers, some of them had scraping attachments. But these are all called adaptations. They are things that that particular species has that other species may not, to help it have a leg up or an advantage in its habitat. So those adaptations could be hooked feet or suction cups. It could have extra tails for helping it swim. It could have antenna for helping it sense food and its surroundings, gills to help breathe the dissolved oxygen under the water, special mouth parts, or it could have a really fun adaptation like one of the macroinvertebrates we saw earlier, and that would be, switch it up, our caddisfly. So for our project today, we are going to make our very own caddisfly house. And if you see in the little image that picture of the 3 little pigs, it's kind of because the caddisfly makes its home out of whatever materials are available in its habitat. So sometimes you'll see cases made of sticks, straw, rocks. There is a French artist that actually puts precious stones and gold flakes in an area and makes and the caddisflies make their home into works of art. So depending on where they live, these caddisflies can have any number of types of homes, and that has numerous advantages, and it's a great adaptation because it helps it blend into its surroundings, and it helps protect it from getting bashed around in the streams or eaten by predators. So some materials that we'll need for our art project today. You don't need all of these things. These are just guidelines. So if you wanted to use a cup of water and a paintbrush to spread the glue on a little bit more thinly, you can. If you're going to be using something like tissue paper or thinner items that you want to have it lay on flat. or you could just squeeze the glue right on the toilet paper tube. And that's kind of what I like to do. A little bit of mess is totally fine with arts and crafts. So you'll need glue, a toilet paper tube, or a paper towel tube that you can cut and make it into different sizes. You can either have natural materials like sticks or grass or leaves, or you could use craft items like tissue paper or pom-poms, yarn, anything that you want your caddisfly house to look like. And you can come up with a great story about where your caddisfly lives. So if you want a rainbow caddisfly house with rhinestones and pom-poms on it, where would be the best place for that caddisfly to live? And then you'll want something to help you clean up once you're done. So it doesn't have to be a paper towel. Paper products, we want to try to cut back on those where you can. So any type of material to clean up. So I have a picture of some of the things that I used. For the heavier items, if you really want to make a caddisfly house with rocks on it, you might need an adult to help you out with a hot glue gun. Elmer's glue can only hold so much. If you want to click to the next slide, Rachel. So first, you're going to want to pick your materials and then glue it onto your toilet paper tube. The one that I have pictured here is one that I made earlier this week. It held up pretty good. See? So I made that one a little bit earlier this week. You'll want to let the materials dry if you want to flip it over to the other side, because otherwise you're going to be playing around with it and your straw or your grass and whatnot is going to fall off, and that would be a little frustrating. We don't want frustrations, we want happy time. So we can click into the next slide. Now, like I said, a caddisfly case or a caddisfly house is great for camouflage. I have an image here on the one side that has a caddisfly case in the picture, but it's really well camouflaged because it's made out of the leaves in the stream bed, so it blends in really well. On the other image, we have my freshly made caddisfly house. You can still see the glue drying a little bit there, blending in with its surroundings, and so it kind of camouflages on its own. I'm going to click ahead. Now, if you want to get really into it, you can take it a step further and make your own little caddisfly larva to live inside your tube. I used a little Easter egg because it's right after Easter time, and I drew some eyes on it, but not everyone has those lying around. So you can make your own larvae very easily with old socks. You can ball them up and stick them in there, clay or Play-Doh, painted stones. You can use your imagination to make our little friend that we just made our home for. And if you are really feeling the arts and crafts spirit, you could use like pom-poms and like googly eyes too. The sky's the limit. And he just fits right in there. Now, there are other activities that you can do in relation to macroinvertebrates if you want to learn more. That first activity on there, Bugs Don't Bug Me, we'll send out all of these resources to those who have attended today, so you don't have to worry about finding them on your own. But that first lesson plan is chock full of great ideas. It has graphing activities with Skittles and M&Ms, and I love anything with candy, so that's great. It has different dress-up activities. You could learn about adaptations. There are activities with more arts and crafts activities that you could build your own creations using clay or modeling dough and add new adaptations on. The second game that's on there, Macroinvertebrate Mayhem, it is more active. You'll need more people for it. But later on, once we are all allowed to be outside with our friends again, that's a fun one as well. And then there are other resources on that link as well, for a bit more of a deep dive experience.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also share with everyone, there's also this macroinvertebrates.org. That's really, really a fun site. So if you want to test yourself some more and see if you can guess what some of the other species are, there is a quiz on there that has hundreds of different macroinvertebrates that you could look at all day. And it's a really, really great resource. It's a very fun website, super easy to navigate. And also I wanted to highlight Stroud Water Resource Center. They're a really great resource. They have a virtual learning page that has activities and fun games, but also has a quiz as well and a number of different images that you can look at. They have their own versions of a dichotomous key or an identification chart that you can look through, and just a really great, wonderful resource. So with that, wanted to just move into if anyone has any questions. We know we threw a lot of information out there really quickly, but you guys picked it up super fast. And we wanted to kind of open this up to questions. So does anyone have any questions for us?
And that's okay if you don't. Like I said, this slideshow will be shared with all of the participants, so you'll be able to see it. We'll be posting it on social media and our YouTube page, so you can share it with anyone you think might be interested. And if you do decide to make a caddisfly house and come up with a cool story for it, please take pictures and share it on our social media page, so that way we can see the awesome new caddisfly homes that are out there.